Welcome to Value Plays Only, where Hullbreaker Horror is just an expensive removal spell. Today we have John, playing Tasigur the Golden Fang. This evolution list looks to ladder Tasigur into massive threats. It plays several infinite mana combos with Tasigur and Thassa's Oracle. His hand contains a Fanatic of Ronus, Dark Ritual, Wishclaw Talisman, Demonic Consultation, Watery Grave, Marsh Flats, and Mana Confluence. Cammy's playing the third Doctor with Vislor Turlough. This Sultai deck is built to push a lot of value. It can win with Food Chain or Thassa's Oracle. Vislor Turlough is also a card advantage engine if you squint. Her hand contains an Opposition Agent, Assassin's Trophy, Wild Growth, Chrome Mox, Flooded Strand, Misty Rainforest, and Command Tower. Dan is playing Etali, Primal Conqueror. This deck wins by casting Etali early and often. He can win with Food Chain or any of his opponent's win conditions. His hand contains Orcish Lumberjack, Tinderwall, Ancient Tomb, Misty Rainforest, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, Zydia and Commercial District. Last we have Tyler, playing Dargo the Shipwrecker and Tymna the Weaver. This deck looks to loop Dargo with Relic Legends or Burgi and a Sacrifice Outlet, or it can win with Underworld Breach. His hand contains Smothering Tide, Goblin Welder, Verdant Catacombs, and Godless Shrine. His London mulligans are Defense Grid, Burnt Offering, and Sticker Goblin. And with that, let's see some value plays. John starts things off with a Marsh Flats. He passes. Cammy plays Command Tower for turn. She then casts Chrome Mox. It resolves, and she imprints Wild Growth. Cammy passes. Dan plays Misty Rainforest for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Taiga. He casts an Orcish Lumberjack. Dan passes. Tyler plays Verdant Catacombs for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Badlands. He casts Goblin Welder. It resolves, and Tyler then casts Lion's Eye Diamond. Content with his start, Tyler passes. In his end step, John pays a life and cracks his Marsh Flats to fetch up an Overgrown Tomb, tapped. John untaps and plays a Watery Grave, into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Fanatic of Ronus. John then passes the turn. Cammy untaps and plays a Flooded Strand for turn. She pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Tropical Island. Cammy passes with a suspicious 3 mana left up. Dan untaps and plays Ancient Tomb for turn. He pays 2 life into Tomb to foretell a card. Dan then casts Tinderwall. It resolves and he passes. Tyler untaps and plays a Godless Shrine, into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Magda, Brazen Outlaw. Tyler then passes. John untaps and plays Windswept Heath for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up nothing, because in response, Cammy casts Opposition Agent. It resolves and John reveals his hand to Cammy. She then searches John's library for a Bayou, putting it in exile with Oppo. John continues his sad turn with a Dark Ritual. He adds 3 black mana. John spends 2 on a Grim Monolith. He then taps Grim Monolith and spends 2 of the mana along with his floating black and delves the 3 cards from his graveyard to cast his commander, Tasigur the Golden Fang. Tasigur resolves and John keeps going. He casts a Wishclaw Talisman as a demonstration of how useless his hand is into the Opposition Agent. John then passes the turn. Cammy untaps and plays Bayou from Exile as land for turn. She casts her commander, Vislor Turlough. She goes to her end step and triggers Vislor. Cammy draws a card and loses 5 life. She then passes. Dan untaps and plays Yavimaya Cradle of Growth as land for turn. He floats 3 mana from his lands and then sacrifices Stomping Ground to Orcish Lumberjack for 4 more mana. He sacrifices Tinderwall to its ability for 2 more and casts his commander, Etali, Primal Conqueror. In response, John taps Fanatic to activate Tasigur. He mills Hullbreaker Horror and Scholar the Lost Trove. Tyler returns Scholar to John's hand. Etali then resolves. Etali's Enter the Battlefield trigger resolves, and Dan exiles Eternal Witness, Simian Spirit Guide, Talisman of Dominance, and Born Upon a Wind. Dan casts all the spells. With no responses, Dan draws 1 from Born, and then all his spells resolve. Eternal Witness triggers to return Tinderwall from Dan's graveyard to his hand. Luckily for the table, Dan is out of gas and has to pass. Tyler untaps and shows John a card in desperation. Tyler says he needs his Magda mana to cast this card to protect against Dan. John agrees to let Magda in to make a treasure. Tyler moves to combat and swings Magda at John. It triggers and makes a treasure. John takes the 2. In his second main phase, Tyler taps out for the card he revealed, Ranger Captain of Eos. It enters, and Tyler declines his search due to the Opposition Agent. With that, Tyler passes. John untaps and plays Mana Confluence for turn. He goes to combat and swings Tasigur at Cammy. She blocks with Vislor, and nothing happens. In his second main phase, John activates Tasigur with Fanatic of Ronus. He mills Banishing Knack and Beseech the Mirror. Tyler gives him Banishing Knack. With not much else to do under Oppo, John passes. Cammy untaps and plays Exotic Orchard as land for turn. She taps out for her other commander, the third Doctor. It enters and Cammy makes a treasure. Cammy goes to combat and swings Vislor at Dan. Dan blocks Vislor with Etali, killing it. With the table pretty confused, Cammy seems very pleased to not be taking Vislor damage in her end step. You may ask, why is this her commander then? And we may never know. Cammy passes. Dan untaps and recasts Tinderwall. He then swings Etali at Cammy, and she takes 7 commander damage. Dan passes. Tyler untaps and goes to combat. He swings Magda at Dan. Magda triggers to make a treasure. Dan blocks with Simian Spirit Guide and both die. In his second main phase, Tyler casts a Culling the Weak, sacrificing Goblin Welder as an additional cost. He adds 4 black mana. Tyler then casts the last card in his hand, which is a Smothering Tithe. The table groans and debates a lot about this card, but ultimately it resolves. Tyler then cracks his Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 white mana. He spends his last floating black to cast his commander, Tymna the Weaver. Tyler then passes. In Tyler's end step, Cammy casts Assassin's Trophy, targeting Smothering Tithe. It resolves and Tithe is destroyed, much to Tyler's sadness. Still in his end step, John puts a Demonic Consultation on the stack. It resolves and John names Seedborn Muse. He exiles about half of his library, including Devoted Druid, Thassa's Oracle, and most of his other win conditions, to find it. The turn then finally passes to John. John untaps and casts Seedborn Muse. Amazingly, it resolves. John then casts an Orcish Bowmasters. It enters and targets the Orcish Lumberjack to ping. Dan responds with a Veil of Summer. It resolves and Dan draws, giving him and his permanents hexproof from black. Bowmasters triggers again and pings Cammy for 1. The original Bowmaster trigger fizzles. John then passes the turn. Cammy and John untap together. Cammy plays Verdant Catacombs for turn. As the game is stalled, Cammy passes the turn. John floats 8 using Grim Monolith and Fanatic Aronis and activates Tasigur twice. The first ability resolves, and John mills Bloodstained Mire and Finale of Devastation. Tyler chooses to give John Finale from his grave. The second ability resolves, and John mills Verdant Catacombs and Amphibian Downpour. Cammy gives him Downpour. The turn then moves to Dan. Dan and John untap together. Dan casts Molten Duplication, targeting Etali. Tyler declines to crack his Ranger Captain and passes to John. John casts Banishing Knack, targeting Tasigur. In response, Dan casts the card he foretold, Delayed Blast Fireball. Tyler passes again, and John responds with a Pact of Negation, targeting Fireball. With no more responses, Pact counters Fireball, and Banishing Knack resolves, targeting Tasigur. John then taps Tasigur to its new ability to return Etali to Dan's hand. Molten Duplication then fizzles. Dan then goes to pass his turn. In his end step, John casts Amphibian Downpour, with Storm count 4. John puts 2 copies on Opposition Agent, 1 on Orcish Lumberjack, 1 on Tymna, and 1 on Ranger Captain of Eos. Tyler responds by sacrificing Ranger Captain to its ability, locking out opponents from casting non-creature spells this turn. The other copies then all resolve. John then activates Tasigur, milling Valley Flood Caller and Vampiric Tutor. Dan adds Banishing Knack to John's hand. The turn then finally passes to Tyler. Tyler untaps and takes no game actions. He passes the turn. In his end step, John activates Tasigur twice. He mills Boseiju Who Endures and Fierce Guardianship. Tyler adds Demonic Consultation to John's hand. He then mills Mana Vault and Toxrill the Corrosive. Tyler adds Mana Vault to John's hand. In John's upkeep, he pays for Pact of Negation, floating 1 with Fanatic of Aronis. He spends his extra to activate Wishclaw Talisman. In response, Tyler casts Silence, hoping to stem the bleeding for 1 more turn. Silence resolves, locking out Tyler's opponents from casting spells this turn. Wishclaw's ability then resolves, and John goes searching for a card. While searching his 20 or so remaining cards, John is struggling to come up with a win that is still in his library. He finds his card and gives Wishclaw to Tyler. John then goes to combat, swinging Tasigur, Seedborn, and the 1/1 Orc army at Dan. Dan takes 7, and John passes. Cammy untaps and plays Misty Rainforest for turn. She cracks Verdant Catacombs and pays a life, fetching up a basic swamp. Cammy then casts her favorite commander, Vislor Turlough. Cammy goes to her end step and triggers Vislor. In response, John activates Tasigur twice. The first activation mills Flooded Strand and Undergrowth Stadium. Cammy gives John Toxrill to hand. The second activation mills Underground Sea and Worldly Tutor. Cammy gives John Worldly Tutor. Vislor then resolves to draw a card and lose 5 life. Bowmasters triggers, dealing 1 damage to Eternal Witness, killing it. Dan untaps and plays Gaia's Cradle for turn. He casts a Desperate Ritual. It resolves and Dan adds 3 red mana. Dan then taps out to cast Etali. In response, John activates Tasigur twice. He mills Mox Diamond and Hoarding Broodlord. Tyler gives John Pact of Negation to hand. John then mills Morphic Pool and Mental Misstep. Tyler adds Mox Diamond to John's hand. John then casts Pact of Negation, countering Etali. With nothing left, Dan passes. Tyler untaps and taps out to cast Praetor's Grasp, targeting Cammy. John responds by activating Tasigur. He mills Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, and Abrupt Decay. Dan gives John Mental Misstep. Praetor's Grasp resolves, and Tyler exiles a card from Cammy's library. He immediately casts the card, which is a Deadly Rollick, targeting Seedborn Muse. John responds with a Banishing Knack, targeting Bowmasters, in the hope that he can save Seedborn. Cammy steps in here and casts Force of Will, paying a life and exiling Brainstorm as an alternate cost. Knack is countered, and Seedborn is then exiled to Deadly Relic. The table rejoices that they're out from under the tyranny for a moment, and the turn passes to John. In John's upkeep, he pays 5 for his Pact of Negation trigger again. John plays Misty Rainforest for turn, he pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Breeding Pool, untapped, paying 2 life. John casts Finale of Devastation, with X equal 3. It resolves, and John returns Valley Floodcaller from his graveyard to the battlefield. John then goes to combat and swings the Orc Army and Tasigur at Dan. Dan takes 6, and John passes the turn. Cammy untaps and plays an Overgrown Tomb for turn, untapped, paying 2 life. Cammy taps 3 for Eternal Scourge. The table sits up a bit, but luckily Cammy passes the turn. Dan untaps and takes no game actions. He passes. Tyler untaps and also passes the turn. In his end step, John flashes in a Mana Vault. John then casts Noxious Revival, targeting Banishing Knack in his grave. In response, Cammy pays a life and cracks Misty Rainforest, fetching up an Underground Sea. She reveals a March of Swirling Mist to the table, and they debate for a bit on the best time to get around Floodcaller. Noxious Revival resolves, and Banishing Knack goes on top of John's library. The turn then passes to John. In his upkeep, there's a lot of debate about the timing of March, but ultimately, John draws Banishing Knack and moves to his main phase. John swings Tasigur and the Orc Army at Dan, and he takes 7. John then passes. Cammy untaps and plays a Bayou for turn. She casts a Demonic Tutor. With Eternal Scourge on board, the table has to care about this. Reluctantly, Demonic Tutor resolves, and Cammy searches a card to hand. She then casts Food Chain. The table has to answer this, and the table passes to John for answers. John activates Tasigur once, milling Rhystic Study and Force of Negation. Tyler reluctantly adds Pact to John's hand. John responds to Food Chain with a Banishing Knack, targeting Valley Floodcaller. The whiplash at the table is palpable. Floodcaller triggers to get +1/+1. After a lot of debate, Cammy decides to cast March of Swirling Mist with X equals 2, targeting Valley Floodcaller and Tasigur. John responds with a Pact of Negation on March, countering it. Floodcaller triggers to get +1/+1. Banishing Knack then resolves. John taps Floodcaller to return Mana Vault to his hand. He responds by tapping it for 3 mana. He spends 1 of this mana to cast Mana Vault, triggering Floodcaller to untap. He presents a loop of bouncing and casting Mana Vault to make 10 million colorless mana. He then spends 1 black on a Demonic Consultation. John knows there's only 1 colored rock left in his deck, and he has to hit it or he'll fizzle here. Consult resolves, and John names Arcane Signet. He exiles the top 6, including Reality Shift, which was his intended win condition. He exiles all but the last 3 in his library, adding Arcane Signet to hand. John then casts Arcane Signet, triggering Floodcaller. He then taps Floodcaller to return Arcane Signet to his hand. Dan then steps in and shows a Boseiju who endures. He plans to try and stop John here, but then remembers that Food Chain is still on the stack, buried under all this Floodcaller nonsense. Cammy assures Dan that she'll just pass the turn if he stops John here. Dan then channels Boseiju, targeting Arcane Signet. John responds by flashing in a Mox Diamond. Floodcaller triggers to untap. John then responds to Boseiju by tapping Floodcaller again, returning Arcane Signet to hand. John then presents a new loop of using all his colorless to loop Arcane Signet, making 1 million mana of each color. John then activates Tasigur over and over again until all non-land cards in his library are in his graveyard and all cards in his graveyard have been added to his hand. John flashes in Hullbreaker Horror. He then casts Mana Vault, triggering Hullbreaker Horror to return Orcish Bowmasters to his hand. He casts Bowmasters, triggering Hullbreaker to return Mana Vault to his hand. It enters and he deals 1 to one of his opponents. John presents a loop of casting and bouncing Mana Vault and Orcish Bowmasters, pinging each opponent for 1 until they're all dead. With that, John wins the game. So what did we learn today? Seedborn Muse is better than Smothering Tithe, and Pact of Negation really costs 15 mana. If you have any suggestions for commanders we should play or other tips for the video, leave them below. Until next time, keep making value plays.
I will cast Food Chain.
I will...
Well, you have to stop Food Chain.
Right. You're right.
I'll get it back.
Pact to hand. Banishing Knack, target Valley Floodcaller.
That's up, brother.
Oh, now he's doing it.
I will tap Floodcaller, target Arcane Signet.
Right.
Okay, I will tap these 2.
Yeah.
And I will Boseiju.
I'll respond. Flash Mox Diamond, trigger Floodcaller to untap.
Mm-hmm.
And I will win on top of that now.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay?
Yeah, that's cool.